Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for millions of people out there. Today, we've the honor of being joined by Cary Claiborne, who is Chief Executive Officer of a company called Adial Pharmaceuticals. It's a clinical stage biopharma company. They're focused on developing therapies for the treatment of addiction and various related diseases, including alcohol use disorder, which is a condition that in the United States alone, estimated 35 million people suffer, resulting in significant health, social, and financial cost. And as current treatments come with a broad array of side effects, it's an area that no doubt is considered unmet and is looking for new opportunities. Mr. Claiborne has over 3 decades of experience in various leadership roles in both clinical and commercial stage publicly traded biopharmaceutical companies. Most recently, he was the CFO and director of Indivior, a publicly traded specialty pharma company focused on addiction medicines and medicines for severe mental illnesses that was spun off by Reckitt Benckiser, which he led, ultimately to become a publicly traded independent company. Prior to that, Mr. Claiborne served as CFO of Sucampo, which was later sold to Mallinckrodt, and before that, CFO and corporate secretary of Osiris Therapeutics, and played important roles in their IPO. Mr. Claiborne also sits on the board of Neuroscience Therapeutics, which is a clinical stage drug development company working in the area of ALS, and Citrix Corporation, which is focused on discovering new cancer therapeutics. He did his undergraduate degree at Rutgers, Scarlet Knights, went on to do his MBA at Villanova, go Wildcats, and was also a National Association Corporate Directors Governance Fellow. A lot of really interesting topics to get into today. Excited to have him with us. Cary Claiborne, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thanks a lot, Ira. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Yeah, no, really looking forward to this one. I took a look at your bio, and I was really intrigued that, I noticed that you started off your career, the first 15 years or so in the energy business, spending a lot of time at General Electric, and then segued into biopharma, and you sort of never looked back at that point. It's been sort of the place you've been. What got you interested in pharma in the first place? You mind telling us a little bit of background
Sure.
story?
Great question. And, it was GE, GE's big, not just energy. So I spent time start off in energy, then aerospace, about 7 years there, probably last 5 years at GE Capital. So great, place to get great experience. Like you said, right out of Rutgers, went to GE. 15 years there, then MCI for 3 years, left after the merger with WorldCom, spent a little bit of time at Home Depot and Constellation Energy. So all first half of my career, all big, companies, most were Fortune 20 companies. GE, I think at the time was number 1. Those were the days, right, under Jack Welch.
Yep.
But, I reached the point where I was ready to be a CFO, and this little privately held stem cell company called Osiris was, aspirations of being the first company to launch a stem cell product using adult stem cells. And they were looking for a CFO. And I felt like that was the right opportunity to go run my own shop from a financial standpoint. And a small company, going from huge to very small. But they were, the kind of work we were doing there were we were trying to develop a drug for graft versus host disease, which is a disease where, the patients are already sick, they have cancer, then they get a bone marrow transplant, and then that transplant starts attacking the body. And a lot of these patients were babies. And because it wasn't an approved drug, we had to each case go to FDA and get compassionate use approval to allow the patients to at least try this because they had tried everything else. And it meant, it was a death sentence at that point. So we were literally saving babies. And I remember at one point I'm thinking, man, this is so much more important than how many cans of paint we sold at Home Depot. And that really hooked me on just on, life sciences in general, where you really had an opportunity to make a mark and maybe, make some changes that could really impact people's lives. And that's where it got started. And like you said, I never really looked back. Anytime I'm looking at an opportunity from that point on, looking at, what impact can this company really make? Can it make a difference? And, as you get older in life, I think at least I do, you tend to look for opportunities where you can look back and say you helped make a difference, hopefully.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Cary, of course, this episode is going to be focused on you. It's going to be focused on Adial. But there's one other name that we have to talk about as we get into the story here, which is extremely important, and that is your partner in this initiative, Dr. Bankole Johnson, who has a whole amazing background, sort of at the intersection of neuropsychopharmacology, of neuroimaging. In the early 90s, very involved in, when sort of the human genome was unlocked and everyone was looking at cancer and everything. He was focused on the genomics of addiction. Introduce us to Dr. Johnson and talk for a couple of minutes about your sort of connection and relation with him, and we'll get to Adial in a bit, but
Yeah,
I think he's an important part of this story.
sure. He absolutely. I mean, there'd be no Adial if there wasn't for Dr. Johnson. He's a co-founder of the company. He's recently moved on, so he's no longer with the company, but yeah, his legacy is still here. And he's a pioneer, like you said, a pioneer in treating alcohol use disorder on a genetic basis. Looking at certain genotypes and using low dose ondansetron. So he's been at it for over 20 years and really put the foundation in place for where the company is today. So he's still available for me to reach out to in terms of any historical knowledge I need. He set the tone. It's a miracle that he's narrowed it down to specific genotypes where we now see signals that we believe will work in terms of reducing the amount that people drink that possess those certain genotypes. So it's really admirable to see his research pay off and get the company to where it is today.
Absolutely. Let's introduce the audience to alcohol use disorder, because this was a term that I was sort of unaware of, sort of broadly defined as a medical condition. It is this impaired ability to stop or control alcohol use, even though we know it has these major consequences. And it's kind of an umbrella over everything from abuse, dependence, addiction, and alcoholism. And as you were mentioning, obviously this major genomic component that you guys are looking at. But introduce us to the overarching theme, if you would, of AUD.
Yeah, so like you said, I think in your intro, overall, it's a major public health issue. It is estimated to affect anywhere from 30 to 35 million people. Most people don't know it's the number one cause of death in people aged 15 to 49. It contributes to over 200 different medical issues and problems, in things like cancer or liver disease, depression, suicide, not to mention fatal car accidents and things like that. So it's it's just a major issue when it comes to impacting not just the patient but the families of those patients, people they don't even know sometimes if there's crime involved. In a lot of cases, abuse, domestic abuse, and things like that. And it's been sad that there has not been a new drug approved to treat AUD in over 15 years in the United States. and we'll talk more about the kind of treatments that are out there,
Sure.
but it's a widely unmet medical need. Most people aren't even seeking treatment just because they're not aware that there are some therapies out there. And unfortunately, a lot of therapies, as you mentioned, have significant side effects and other things, which keeps them from seeking the treatment to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And that's it's a perfect segue into sort of the unmet landscape that we have before us. And again, I was looking back on this because I started off as a pharmacist, several careers ago, a few decades back. I remember dispensing a lot of Antabuse/disulfiram, and that's just a nasty old thing that makes you nauseous. You have naltrexone and caprosate, playing around with opiate receptors and NMDA and all that, and nothing else in between. So give us a little bit of expand upon that for a couple minutes. And then if you could take us just into, because I know the study of the serotonin, there's a serotonin 3 receptor, serotonin 3 agonist domain, obviously goes back to ondansetron and sort of the chemotherapy nausea space before all this. But work in there a little bit how Dr. Johnson came up with this sort of connection in his early work.
Yeah, so first let's touch on, like you said, the way it's been treated up to this point, from a medical standpoint. There are 4 or 5 drugs approved on the market. Like you said, they do various things. They, some reduce cravings, some blunt the intoxicating effects of alcohol. So you drink, you don't get any benefit from it. Some are deterrents, like you said, like Antabuse, which is, once you're on it, if you have any alcohol whatsoever, you have a severe reaction. So, nausea, vomiting, sometimes it's so severe the patient has to go to the ER to get treatment. But the one thing all those drugs have in common are they all require abstinence in the label before a patient should start treatment. And abstinence is a major barrier to treatment because if you think about someone that is going through, they're already a heavy drinker and they want to get on treatment, to go abstinent, they basically have to go through significant, withdrawal. And then if they're successful to getting to that point and are allowed and get on a drug, they have to make a pretty dramatic change in their lifestyle to maintain abstinence. A lot of times that means they have to distance themselves from those kind of triggers that may cause them to start drinking again. So that means it may mean stay away from certain friends, certain family members. You can't go to social events where alcohol is being served. And you think, that's the majority of social events these days in a lot of cases. So people do not want to do that. I mean, it may work in the short run, but long term, you really don't see people, maintaining long-term abstinence. You see it for maybe 5% of the people that try it based on the data that's out there. But for the majority, it doesn't work. And then the side effects for the other drugs that are out there are so severe that patients can't tolerate them and they can't stay on it. So there's definitely opportunity for a new way of treating this. And, to go back to Dr. Johnson and his theory on low dose ondansetron, based on earlier research, it was shown that, because ondansetron is a 5-HT3 or serotonin 3 blocker, and serotonin 3 is believed to impact the dopamine reward system, which, impacts cravings and impulsivity. It's believed that if certain patients are on the drug, by blocking the serotonin 3 receptor, it lowers that impulse and lowers that craving, and the patients drink less. And one of the big differences is you do not have to be abstinent to start this treatment and to stay on this treatment. It's really designed to lower your drinking. And that's where FDA and Europe, European countries have come more around on as more of a harm reduction approach to treating alcohol use disorder, and not forcing or requiring total abstinence as an outcome, but looking back and saying, the data has really shown this, the heavy drinking that is causing the problems, both physically, mentally and socially. So if you can take a patient from being a heavy drinker to even drinking in moderation, that's a meaningful endpoint.
Absolutely.
And now even the FDA has come around based on our discussions with them, and they're looking at that as an endpoint. So that's very favorable for us because that's what our drug is designed to do, is to reduce that drinking back to a more moderate level.
Mm-hmm. That's to sort of repeat that for the audience, that's an extremely elegant way to think about it again, in terms of harm reduction, not having to go to zero, but ultimately sort of shrinking that gap down. And at the same time, another piece that I just wanted them to understand as well, this is a very elegant, as it's a very hot term nowadays, but a very elegant repurposing story as well, that instead of spending 10 years trying to discover a new molecule, discovering these new uses for existing molecules that have safety and efficacy track record is also a very, very impressive thing there, and it obviously allows you to get the therapies into the clinic faster and into patients faster. So that's great. Let's talk about take us up to this to date on the clinical development, because I know there was recently, I think most recently, a phase 2b study that you did with the low dose of ondansetron, something like 300 patients. Walk us a little through, about getting this, studying up the study, and a little bit about what you found here in terms of the endpoints, because it's all pretty impressive.
Yeah, so actually the most recent readout, almost 2 years ago now, was a phase 3 study.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Sorry.
It was a phase 3, it followed a phase 2b study that was about 283 patients. The phase 3 study was done in Europe, 6 countries, about 25 sites.
Nice.
And the inclusion criteria, is based, again, our drug is based on a precision medicine. So it's based on certain patients having certain genotypes.
Yep.
So the first thing that was done in terms of enrolling patients was they were giving a genetic test. And if they had one of 4 genotypes, and this was based on what was learned in the phase 2b study, that it was narrowed down to potentially 4 genotypes, where apparently low dose ondansetron seems to work extremely well in helping those patients drink less. So in the phase 3, the test, you were given a test. If you had one of 4 genotypes, you were enrolled in the study.
Nice.
And the patients were then stratified based on their drinking levels between two categories: heavy drinkers, which is defined as patients drinking anywhere from 6 to 10 drinks on days that they drink. And we call that DDD, or drinks per drinking day. So that was one category. The other category were very heavy drinkers. Those were patients that drank more than 10 drinks on days that they drank. And the average for those folks were about 15. So it's a pretty high range of very heavy drinkers. The mix was about 63% in the study were in the heavy drinking category, and the balance were in the very heavy drinking category. So that was a basic inclusion criteria. We ran the study, reported out. The overall study missed the primary endpoint, which was reduction in heavy drinking days. Based on that, we did a post hoc analysis to look at what was really going on within the study. And what we found was there's definitely a difference between how ondansetron works for heavy drinkers versus very heavy drinkers.
Okay.
And then within the genotypes, within those 4 genotypes, we saw one genotype in particular, the AG genotype, which really drove most of the performance. So those patients with the AG genotype in the heavy drinking category performed the best and met statistical significance with both the European endpoint and the US endpoint. Excellent. And the endpoints are slightly different. I'll talk about the US endpoint because that's where our primary focus is now, based on what we learned. Okay. So the US endpoint is the percentage of patients that have no heavy drinking days in the last 2 months of a 6-month study. Mm-hmm. And the reason, so FDA looks at that as, again, if the heavy drinking days are the days that cause the real problems, we want to see, significance for patients that had zero heavy drinks. They can't have one day in that last 2 months where they drank more than 5 drinks a day. That's the definition of a heavy drinking day for a man, and for a woman is 4. So you measure that versus placebo, and if you can show statistical significance, then that's a valid endpoint for the US endpoint. So the AG group, the people with the AG genotype, met that significance within the heavy drinking group. There was another genotype, the GG group, didn't quite get there, but our data kind of showed that if the study had been a little bit longer and we enrolled more patients because they were a smaller sample size, there's a good chance that we might get there with that group as well. Those 2 groups represent about 20% of the population that suffers from AUD. So still potentially a big number if more patients are seeking treatment. So because we are, laser focused on getting this drug approved and to market as soon as we can, we're going to move forward with those smaller groups, more narrow, refined approach. It gives us the highest chance of success, we believe, in terms of getting the drug approved.
Yeah, I mean, it's look, it's drug development 101. And again, you're pointing out, here we are, it's 2024. This is, everyone's talked about personalized medicine, and here it is, right? I mean, and even to get out 20% of it, and it's still a gigantic population there. So the fact that you're able to stratify and target those genotypes is awesome. And I think there's one other piece of it, which I hope you just say a couple words about, this principle of moving this whole area of alcohol use disorder as something that, for whatever, the last 1,000 years, whatever has been seen as a weakness, a flaw, and the ability to now pair up a drug with, hey, there's a genetic cause here, a treatable genetic-based disease. That's a very unique story in its own right there. And I just want to, I don't want to gloss over that one point.
Oh, no, that's a really, really important point. As I mentioned, we talk about big numbers, right? 30 million, 35 million potentially, but the number that actually get diagnosed is a fraction of that because patients aren't seeking treatment, don't even want to have a discussion about it with their doctor. So, our research has shown that a precision approach should open the door to a lot more people even seeking treatment because it allows the doctor, when they're looking at, say, your lab work, or you're filling out the survey you fill out about your drinking and eating and things like that when you're in a physical. And nowadays, what we hear is a doctor, if he brings it up to a patient, they say, that's not me. I don't have a problem. I don't even want to talk about it. But if they have a different approach where they say, I noticed you've been drinking more than you have been historically, there's a test we can give you because our drug will have a companion diagnostic, which is that genetic test. There's a test we can give you. And based on your genetic profile, there may be a medication that can help you drink less. And then the patient's reaction is more, hey, that's interesting to me. I'd like to learn more about that. It also removes it from being sort of a behavioral issue that maybe there's a medical issue going on here, or maybe there's something genetically predisposed in their DNA that's causing the problem, potentially. So we feel like it's going to open the door to much more robust discussions. The patient agrees to take the test, and based on, if they have that genotype, be more receptive to treatment, like you said, as opposed to it being a behavioral downfall or something. They now have a reason maybe to understand what's been going on with their drinking behaviors.
Excellent. And I think today, there was a press release about the study. So it was the European Journal of Internal Medicine, low-dose ondansetron, candidate prospective precision medicine to treat alcohol use disorder and endophenotypes. Okay, the news is out there now. What's coming next, Cary? Because obviously, you're focusing in on these endophenotypes.
Right.
There's still a huge market there to hit now. What happens next in the clinical program?
So we just earlier this month announced that we started a pharmacokinetic study, which is part of the requirements for, as you mentioned, when you do a repurposed drug, you still have to show bioavailability and things like that. Something that FDA is going to require, to ultimately get approval. That was a study that we could do on our own without needing, we had enough funding to launch it and get it done. It's relatively short, relatively low cost. So we dosed the first patient in that study beginning of June, and we expect to have a readout of top line data in that study in the fourth quarter of this year. We're at the same time preparing for what the next phase 3 study should look like based on feedback we got from FDA last year. As I said, we're going to move forward with the smaller patient population in terms of the genotypes. We're definitely going to go forward with DAG. And we're considering what to do about it, GG, whether we do that in the first study or we do some kind of label expansion with that. So we're designing that study. The plan is to take the results of the PK study as well as the design, meet with the FDA in the fourth quarter of this year and get the green light to start another phase 3 early next year. A lot of it's funding dependent, as it is for most, small biotech companies. If we want to go as fast as we can go, as fast as the funding allows us to go. But at the same time, we're also in discussions with potential partners that may have an interest in collaborating with us in the development in return for commercial rights. So that's also going. So should be a pretty active remaining part of the year as we get through this, phase PK study and go to FDA, hopefully get favorable feedback from those meetings and be able to go into the next. We think we need to do 2 phase 3 studies just to make sure that we meet the requirements to get this drug approval. We can run those in parallel, and they're smaller studies than the last study was because we've narrowed the population down.
Right. Yep. So, just to recap, novel mechanism, it's genetically targeted, it's oral dosing, you don't have to be abstinent. What else is serotonin 3 receptors potentially? Obviously, you're heavily going to be focused on the alcohol use disorder, but clearly people are addicted to all sorts of things that most likely are stimulating that dopamine reward system from illicit drugs to social media. Where else is this potentially going to go?
Well, you hit the head. You hit it right on the head. So if you think about any addiction that is impulse driven or cravings driven, is potentially something where this drug may show benefit. So obesity, because that's impulse driven a lot of times with eating and craving, so potential for weight loss. Gambling, I think, will be a big one down the road in terms of you just can't watch a sporting event or anything these days without gambling advertisements coming up. Smoking cessation, opiate use disorder. So potentially any of those. And we plan to conduct some more research in those areas. But as you said, our primary focus right now is for AUD because we're at, given where the stage of the study is, phase 3, we'd like to get that one done first, and then focus on some of these other areas.
Excellent. Cary, what else are you going to be up to in the coming months? I know you get out there a lot, not just the scientific conferences, but of course, your public companies at a lot of the financial conferences as well. What's anything coming up that we should know about for the rest of 2024 in terms of conferences, talks you're going to be giving, places that we may bump into you and meet you and listen to you? Anything else I missed while we have you today?
No, we're definitely going to be, as you said, active in conferences. We'll be at right now we will be at the H.C. Wainwright conference in New York in September. There may be some other conferences we do in the fall. So definitely keep your eye out on that. We will be reporting readouts again on our study, our PK study, as well as how our meetings go with FDA. And as we continue to make progress, we'll try to keep the market abreast and aware of what's going on.
Excellent. No, I love the story. I love not just the as mentioned, the novel nature of the product, but also the sort of the elegant way that you put together novel mechanism with repurposing and moving. Yeah, I love hearing about small companies in phase 3 clinical development. It's just it's a very exciting story, and I look forward to continue following you and the company and really wishing you the best as you continue the clinical development of the asset. But really great story for everybody that, again, is going to be listening to this particular episode across our podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Cary Claiborne, Chief Executive Officer, Adial Pharmaceuticals. Cary, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while and educate us on all of these topics today. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing for broadly the area of addiction and AUD, of course. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for literally millions of people out there that require these therapies. Really great story.
Well, thanks so much, Ira, again for having me. I love, any opportunity I get to talk about what we're doing and hopefully reach a broader audience that can stay tuned, keep their eye on what we're doing. So I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Great having you, Cary.